Hey, Tim, we're curious. When we look at the housing market right now, it feels like a perfect storm of rising costs, constrained supply, and policy roadblocks. But from your perspective, what's the one factor that's being overlooked in this conversation, and how do you see it shaping the future of of housing in Australia?
The one factor that probably hasn't had its due attention is the restrictions we have on foreign investors. It is one topic that we continue to pursue. What we saw in that 2015-16 cycle, when ASIC intervened into the market, they said we're building too many homes in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, particularly apartments. They put in place a series of restrictions. Then state governments doubled down. Then the federal government came in. And just in this last budget, we saw both Queensland and New South Wales introduce additional restrictions on foreign investors. Now, those measures quite possibly revenue negative. That is, they're forcing out so much investment, so much home building activity, they're going to constrain other forms of taxation, income tax, broader stamp duty, not just the punitive restrictions. So to me, it is the easy win. Just why we don't want Japanese or the Americans to build apartments in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane is beyond me.
Tim, can I just pick up on that point? For our listeners' benefit, what they need to understand is usually a developer needs a percentage of pre-sale in terms of the numbers of of properties that they need pre-sold to get the funding to actually get the construction out of the ground. Can you just unpack that a little bit more for our community to understand the importance of that? And if they don't have that level of pre-sale, ultimately we don't get, that additional 75% of supply arriving to meet this housing crisis that we've currently got.
That's right. We're building half the number of apartments now as to what we were in 2015, 2016 timeframe. And part of that is that loss of foreign investors. And at the moment, there are some other problems in the cycle as well. We've seen a rapid increase in material prices, the magnitude of about 35% since the start of the pandemic. Seen labour costs increase that 30 to 35%. We're through both of those cycles now. Material price rises through to June this year were 1.1%. So that's back to well under CPI, back to pre-pandemic volumes. Labour shortages still remain and they're going to continue. They're not quite as acute as what they were at the peak of the pandemic. Those labour shortages will linger because of other construction activities. So in Sydney, it's Western Sydney Airport, the metro system. In Melbourne, all of the infrastructure there. In Perth, they're also building tunnels. So those labour constraints will remain. But we have a problem that we can't get anywhere near the volume of apartments commencing construction is what we need to meet underlying demand, and even not back to the level we were doing a decade ago. And that's partly due to that loss of foreign investment. Developers of apartments need, at the moment, probably 80 to 90% pre-sold before they'll get a commencement. We've entered a little bit of an infinite loop cycle where over the past 3 years, every time they sold that volume, they go back to the builder and say, yes, we're ready to start. And the builder would say, the complex is now 10% more expensive. Now we're through that cycle. We're probably still going to wait another 12 months before apartment builders have the confidence to know that they can reach completion within 3 years. High rises are typically a 3-year build. And because of that long build time frame, they have been resistant through this cycle to commence. The second reason they're resistant to commence is there is an enormous amount of other construction projects that they can undertake at the moment where there is one customer, namely government, and they don't have to deal with the complexities of hundreds of homeowners and the like. So that is going to be a problem. There is only one way we can get to that 1.2 million, and that involves a significant increase in apartment construction. Yeah. And it is politically unpopular, but while we have 550,000 new net overseas migrants, and that number is likely to remain very elevated for at least the next 2 years. It's very hard for the government to slow down overseas migration once it's started. And migrants typically reside in apartments in metropolitan cities for the first 1 to 7 years of their time in Australia, and only then do we start to see them flow through to detached housing demand. So from a policy perspective, we have to address that apartment cycle and at the same time continue to build medium and low-rise housing as well.